Me the last couple weeks. First I had to prepare for Stephanie to go, and then she went, and it's not easy like that. It's different. I have to cook my own food. I have to use an alarm clock. And neither one of those things are fun. I have to iron my own clothes and do my own laundry. And it's experience I don't want to have, but like Sister Anders said, I guess it is good for me. But no, I guess it is for the work of the Lord, so I guess it is for a good reason, but it doesn't make it any easier by any means. Genesis chapter 22, verse 1. The first message that I had ever preached was out of these same scriptures that I'm going to use tonight. And so to me, these scriptures are special to me. And they always will be. But verse 1 says, "And it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abraham and said unto him, Abraham. And he said, Behold, here I am." As I read that verse, I thought about how willing Abraham was to just answer the Lord. He didn't go, okay, is that you, God, or is that someone else? But he just knew the voice of God, and he was willing to give an answer. He didn't hesitate or anything. He just knew that it was the Lord and answered. Verse 2 says, "And he said, Take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him therefore for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee of." God gave Abraham a plan. He told him exactly what to do. And just like he did in the first verse, he gave him an answer. And it was just, okay. He's given us a plan. He's given us the Bible. Yeah. And just like with Abraham, we have to just say, okay, some things are not going to be easy in it. There's going to be trials and there'll be tests. But we have to just say, okay, and let the Lord take care of the rest. Verse 3, and it says, "And Abraham rose up early in the morning and saddled his ass, and took 2 of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, and clave the wood for the burnt offering, and rose up, and went to the place which God had told him." I think it's safe to say that in Abraham's situation, all of us would be very hesitant to go. Especially with me, I've got a baby on the way, and I would be hesitant now to go with something like that, let alone before I even get to hold, that's before I get to even hold the baby. Once it's here, I don't even know that I'd be willing to go. Me and God, we'd have to have some conversations there first. But Abraham was just willing to go. He didn't hesitate. That's right. He just went, and he had enough faith that everything would work out. And one thing that I've always found is that God will always bring us through. Verse 4 says, "Then on the third day Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place afar off." For this point with Abraham, there was no turning back. And we see that because he had traveled so far knowing what was going to happen. He finally looked up and he seen the place in his mind. It was like you could just see his mindset was, I'm determined. This is what God said. It may not be easy, but I'm determined to please the Lord. Verse 5, and it goes on to say, "And Abraham said unto his young men, Abide ye here with the ass, and I and the lad will go yonder and worship, and come again to you." I don't feel like that Abraham was just being a little bit optimistic when he said, "I and the lad will return unto you." But I think instead he was speaking in faith that God would allow him and his son to return. It wasn't just I'll bring his body back, or something like that. It was a me and him will come back. Whenever you hear someone say that, you don't think, well, part of that's going to happen. You think if you send your son with somebody, you think they're going to bring them back, right? Both of them. And I'm sure that was Abraham's mindset. We're both going to come back. And that's speaking with some real faith, knowing that God told you to sacrifice somebody or something to say, we're just going to come back to you. But he had such a connection with God that he was able to speak with such faith. And whenever we worship God with our whole hearts, we will be the same way. And I'm sure that Abraham, through this trial, that was the only thing that kept him through, was just keeping that connection with God. Verses 6 through 8 say, And Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and laid it upon Isaac his son. He took the fire in his hand and a knife, and they went both of them together. And Isaac spake unto Abraham his father and said, My father. And he said, Here am I, my son. And he said, Behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? And Abraham said, My son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering. So they went both of them together. There in verse 7, I didn't think about this earlier, but I thought, man, that is an awkward question to ask at a time like that. You've given him the wood to carry. You've given him the fire, and you're getting everything ready. He's carrying up the hill, and he says, Daddy, what are we going to use to sacrifice? How do you answer that? I didn't think about that earlier, but Abraham had to come up with something. What are you going to say? Well, boy, I'm going to tie you up, and I'm going to toss you on there, and I'm going to light you on fire. How do you say that? But that wasn't what he said. He said, it was like I thought back to, now I'm thinking about it, I think back to what he said to the young man that traveled with him, and that was that me and the lad would return. He said, God will provide a lamb. And that took faith. I'm saying that word a lot tonight, but it took so much faith to just be able to do that. I can't picture Brother Anders looking at his son, Brother Josh, and giving him some wood to carry up a mountain so that he could sacrifice him. I just can't picture it. Because I know the love that they have for each other, but Abraham did that. It didn't matter, but he also knew that they would be returning. In verse 9 it says, And they came to the place which God had told him of. And Abraham built an altar there, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him upon the altar upon the wood. I don't read in the scripture where Isaac ever fought Abraham back. To me, this tells me that he had seen enough faith in Abraham's life that when Abraham said, Okay, son, this is it. God told me to do this. I can just see Isaac going, okay, I don't understand, but if that's what God said, that's what we're going to do. I would not have been that easy. I couldn't do it. There's no way I would have been that easily if my dad had ever looked at me and said, Son, God told me I'm going to have to kill you. I would have said, I don't know who you're talking to, but it's not God. But Isaac said, but you can just tell by the way that he acted. I don't see where he fought him. I know he was confused, but he had to see some kind of faith in Abraham for something like that. Verses 10 through 12 say, And Abraham stretched forth his hand and took the knife to slay his son. And the angel of the Lord called out of heaven and said unto him, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here am I. And he said, Lay not thine hand upon the lad, neither do anything unto him. For now I know that thou fearest God, seeing that thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son. At this point, Abraham can take a sigh of or a breath of fresh air. What he thought would be the end of his son's life, I'm sure, turned out to simply just be a test. And everything that he had spoken faith was going to come true. He was willing to do whatever God said, and that's all that truly mattered. Sometimes I wonder if I'm willing to do everything that God has said of me. As I open up the Word, as I read it, sometimes I look at things in there and I wonder if I'm really willing to do everything that it says. It's not always easy. There's going to be tests and there'll be trials, I know. But I don't know that I can really get through it sometimes. But whenever I truly just apply it to my life and let God take care of everything, it always seems to work out, no matter what the situation is. Verse 13, it says, And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram, caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up for a burnt offering instead of his son. Like Abraham told his son that God would provide a lamb, he did. And I'm sure even after that, Isaac, looking back over that for the rest of his life, said, okay, there was even more faith in him than what I had saw before that incident. Like I said, he didn't fight. He had to see some kind of faith in Abraham in order for that to happen, just for Abraham to say, okay, this is what God said. But after that, think about the faith that Isaac continued to see in him. Just because of this one incident, it didn't matter what God said. He was just going to do it. To me, and that takes so much for Isaac and for Abraham. And I couldn't do that. But I've learned that it doesn't matter what we're asked to do by the Lord, that He's always going to make a way for it to happen. It doesn't matter what trials we may go through or anything like that, because God always makes a way of escape. He's never going to overbear us. He's never going to give us something that we can't pull through. But instead, He's always going to help us through. I've heard of stories where ships were in really dangerous storms. It seemed like there was no way out, and somehow the storm would just ease off and they could just get out. Fishermen who had their lives were on the line, and they would come back to their families. I've heard of incidents where car accidents were avoided because someone just thought to make a different turn. Or incidents where people were in car accidents and should have had severe injuries and nothing happened. I've heard of cancer being cured. God never gives us anything that we can't handle. And the point that I really wanted to get across through everything that I said tonight is that we can always trust God for everything. Although trials and tests come like what they did for Abraham, God always helps us through. And I know, being young, I haven't seen as much as maybe as all of you have, but I've seen enough to know that I can trust God for everything. I've seen enough that I know, no matter what, God's going to get me through every situation and every trial. I know it doesn't matter. Sometimes I know I have hardships, but I know that God will pull me through like what He has every time. It doesn't matter. He's always gotten me through. And that's all that I've got. If we could all pray, maybe that we could have more faith put in the Lord. But He'll always pull you through. Sister Shanna, do you have a song that you can sing?